Okay, now we have learned about transformation and duplication. Now I'm going to learn how to do some basic image adjustments in Photoshop. Okay. First I'm going to adjust the look of my background. Well, there's a couple different things we can do to that background, and we'll take a look at some of these basic image adjustments. There's a couple ways to do this, just like anything else in Adobe Photoshop. There's a couple ways to do this. First thing I'm going to do is click on that layer. I'm on my desert layer here. And the quickest, messiest way to do some basic changes is go to Image, Adjust, and here's a lot of these changes in here. Okay, you can do the very quick, messy brightness and contrast. Make it darker, make it lighter. More contrasty, the higher the contrast, the more towards the darks and lights the colors and the tones go. Lower the contrast, the more towards that medium gray your tones go. Once again, brightness, darkness. That's a very quick, messy way to do things, but that's how you can do it. Another way, Image, Adjust, Levels. Now all these things we're doing through this Image Adjust are destructive, which means if I change everything and then end up closing my project or my file and reopen it later, I cannot undo it. Alright, with the levels I can change my medium gray point to the left and make more room for the light colors, light tones. I can move my medium gray to the right and make more room for dark tones. Down here I can change this left side, this dark slider, the black slider over, and that brings out, lightens up the blacks, the darks in my image. If I come over here to the right, bring that white slider to the left, that's going to add some gray or add some tone to my whites. Okay, that's the quickest, easiest way to think about those. We also have some preset levels in here. Mid-tone's brighter, mid-tone is darker. These are all preset ones you can always experiment with too. And if you're happy with something, you can say OK. Image Adjust. Let's just look at a couple more of these, and I'll show you another way, a non-destructive way to do these changes. We also have curves. Well, curves is a good way to adjust the contrast. Once again, we're just adjusting that desert background. And we have some presets up here, some pretty extravagant ones like the color negative, which really gives you a negative effect. Darker contrast, lighter contrast, medium contrast, strong contrast, and I think I'm going to go for that medium contrast. And what we see happens here is you get three anchors which you can adjust, and a good example of this is the strong contrast. It gives you a nice S-curve here. That S-curve is how you can adjust your contrast. And strong contrast, and if I like that, I could say OK. I can say Command-C to undo that. Let's do our own contrast using the Image Adjust curves. I can also add my own anchored points. Add one here, add one here, add one down here on this line. Then I can grab each anchor point and adjust it. Get a nice S-curve going on there. And I can get a nice contrasty effect, more of a stronger contrast. Best rule of thumb is just to play around with this until you get used to what it does. The closer it is to the straight line, the less contrast. And if I drag my anchor around this way, to the bottom, to the right, it gives me a stronger contrast. The best thing is just to keep playing with it and get used to it. See what it does. I can also get pretty crazy and really drag these out and give us some pretty strong high key contrast. Some acid rock, dope smoking contrast here. Alright, I can do something like that if I want. Don't really like that, so I'm going to tone it back down, bring it back down, bring these anchors back closer to that midline. A little more contrast, but not too much. There we go. And then say OK. So that's the curves. image adjust. We also have hue saturation. I could really saturate my image so the background becomes really saturated, very strong colors, or lower the saturation, fade it out all the way to black and white if I wanted to. Okay, I can also change the hue. Okay, so it's not that realistic looking hue, but it can get pretty crazy, pretty colorful by switching the hue up here in that hue slider. Go back to 0. Another thing we can do at this point in the hue saturation window is colorize. If I click colorize, it's going to keep all the tones, but it's going to make all the color one monochromatic color scheme. And I can raise the saturation, and then I can change the color. If I want a yellow background, green, blue, pink, whatever background I want, I can do that through colorize. I've changed my mind. I don't want to colorize it, so I'm going to click there. I just want to saturate a little bit. So I'm just going to lower the saturation a little bit. One thing you want to avoid is using this lightness slider. That doesn't really do anything good. It messes it up no matter where you put it. So let's just leave that at 0. And once again, we have some presets up here, but I'm not going to use any of those. So maybe I'll try the old style. I sort of like that. So I'm going to say OK. There we go. And one more image adjust is a fun one to use as a photo filter. What the photo filter does is puts a translucent layer of color over the whole layer, and then I can adjust how strong that color comes through from 100% all the way down as low as I want it. Okay, that's for specific colors. I can grab specific colors here, like pink overlay, or I can come up here and select filter and select some of these predetermined filters. Cooling filter, yellow filter, your sepia tone for old photos, the old photo look, your cyan for the old tintype look. Anyway, so there's tons of filters underneath here. These are based on old wet photography enlarging. There we go. I'm going to go with the sepia tone and then raise the density a little bit. Do that nice faded out background. And OK. Alright, we can also come up here, image adjust, and do the desaturation, which brings it all back down to black and white. Once again, those are all destructive, so that's one quick option to do it, but let's learn a non-destructive way. Option Command Z. I'm going to undo all the stuff I just did to get me back to where I started from. There we go. Now let's look at some non-destructive options. Over here in my layers menu, I'm on my desert layer here, and I'm just going to affect that background first, that desert layer background. And we can do that by making a fill or adjustment layer. A couple ways to do that. Click this circle down here that's cut in half, this icon down here, click, and I can select any of these. Let's start with our brightness, contrast, the quickest, messiest way to affect the brightness and contrast. As soon as I clicked that brightness and contrast adjustment layer, the properties window popped up with the options for that adjustment layer. I can make it brighter, darker, raise or lower the contrast, just like we did up here in the image adjustments. Good. Now I can add another one. I can add my levels, and then I'll have my levels adjustment up here. I can adjust that mid-tone, move that mid-tone to the right so there's a little more room for the darks. And I'm going to bring a little bit of detail out of those dark colors here with that slider. Okay, as you see, as we add more adjustment layers, and I look over here in my layer window, it actually adds a new layer and a layer mask that gives me that effect. There's my brightness and contrast layer, and there's my levels layer. As you see, as I click around these different layers, my properties window changes so I can come back at any time and readjust these effects. So that brightness and contrast and that levels I can adjust at any time. So that's non-destructive. That's the best way to work. The quick messy way was up here, image adjustments. Those, once you commit to them, you're committed to them. Cool thing about these adjustments layers, I can always change them. And how do I change them? I have my brightness and contrast layer. I can make that real bright and real high contrast if I want, or low contrast. Okay. A couple ways I can change that layer. Most basic way, I don't want that layer anymore. I can delete it, put it in the garbage there. There we go, non-destructive. Now let me bring that back. Option Command Z. Let me bring that brightness contrast layer back. And just like any other layer, I can adjust the opacity of that layer up here. So I can lower the opacity on that layer. So I can start to see what's behind that layer. So that brightness and contrast does not have that strong of effect on my desert. I can also do some blending modes, so that brightness contrast has a slightly different effect on that background. Okay, I'm going to go back to my normal mode there. So those are a couple different ways you can adjust those layers. Let's look at a couple more adjustment layers. And click here, and I could add a photo filter this way. There we go, there's my photo filters. Could do that orange color, double click here and select a different color, or come through here up on my filters and get some of these predetermined colors. And I'm going to go for my sepia tone and raise that density up so it gives it a nice old school effect. And once again, it makes a photo filter effect here. Very useful. Okay, now that's a photo filter just over my background. What if I want to do a photo filter over my whole all my layers? I can come up here to my top layer, come down here and add a photo filter or any of these image adjustment layers. Let me do hue saturation layer this time. You can see it makes my new hue saturation layer here, and I'm going to desaturate and see how it brings all my layers down to black and white. It gives it the appearance of black and white. Now what's cool about that, by doing that in the adjustment layers, I can always come back here later and change that saturation. But once I make an adjustment layer, Photoshop automatically gives me this layer mask that I can work on. So if I click on that layer mask part, I could come over here to my eraser tool. I can right click, adjust the size of my eraser tool, adjust the edge of my eraser tool to be soft, a little bit larger size. Good. Hit enter. Then I can come up here. Whenever we select a tool over here, usually the control panel changes up here. I can lower the opacity on that eraser so it doesn't erase all the way through. 30% maybe. And on my hue saturation layer, I just want, in the mask part, I just want some parts of this image to have a little bit of color. So I'm going to erase into that hue saturation layer. Oops, I'm on the eraser tool, so I got to switch it from black to white. And I can erase into that saturation layer and bring some colors back into the areas that I want to be in full color. There we go. I'm doing a pretty quick, messy job. Obviously, if this was for real, I'd zoom in a little bit, scroll around, make my brush smaller, and carefully bring in some of the color that I want. This is a great way to emphasize certain areas. Okay. So I can have full color up here in the face, and then fade out the colors a little bit as it goes towards the background. Full colors around the eyes and the face, a little bit on the glasses there, but then it's going to fade out to black and white. Alright, went a little too far here. I accidentally brought out some color in the background. So with my eraser tool, I can switch from my white down here at the bottom to the toggle to the black, and then I can go ahead and erase back and add some more of that black and white coloring to the background area. Okay, here we are. So adding that black and white back, and I can switch it again and bring out some more color, maybe in her nose, forehead, etc. Maybe a little more on the lips. And I can zoom out so you see the whole thing. Pretty good effect. Now I got a nice black and white background and a little bit of color on my object here to add some emphasis to that. Alright, now let me show you how we can do an adjustment layer just on part of a layer, or just on a certain object. All the adjustment layers we put on here so far affected the whole layer, or all the layers up here at the top. Now I just want my adjustment layer to affect one of my objects, or one of my protesters here. So I can go to Protester Copy To layer. I can position my cursor over that image icon there, hold the command down, or the layer thumbnail, hold the command down, click once, and it forms a selection over my object, which is this female. Okay. Then I can come down here and make a new adjustment layer. I'm going to do, I guess I will do hue saturation again, and this time it brings up a hue saturation, but it's just affecting that selected part of that layer, as I can see in this new hue saturation blending mode. So now if I just raise that saturation, it just affects this one person, this one object. I can change the tone and do whatever I want, and it just affects that one original selected area. Okay. This one had a little more saturation. There we go. Alright, so those are different ways to do some of your basic image adjustments non-destructively with these layer fills and layer adjustments, or destructively, which means it's not reversible, with these image adjusts and a lot of the same adjustments up here.